Hi, everybody. I hope that being shorter, maybe I can actually speak into the mic a little bit better. I know it's hard to hear in here. That was there are a lot of questions already on the table from that fantastic presentation, and I want to thank Ellen for her introduction, and Wendy, and Thomas, and all of my MCM folks. Of course, if you're invited at your own university, you're really honored, but you don't get the airplane ride to write your paper. But no worries, we're going to be good. We're going to be good. Because you can run over to your office at lunch and, like rewrite and reprint, which is what I did. So I wanted to say that I wanted to kind of echo Lisa Parks and claim rawness, because that's a good thing to be. I kind of spin out into outer space here a couple of times, literally, and this makes me feel that this isn't, I'm glad that we had some careful kind of plotting about remains, because the remains here are rather unruly. I'm interested in the unruliness of remains, actually, and the where and when they spin out is actually part of my point. I also was inspired by Rick Prellinger's images last night, so I went and put a lot more images in, which may mean that we get kind of lost in them, especially because I can't see them. Which is bad. So hopefully I'll be on the right image at the right time. Now, is that nothing? Okay, all right. Just as a preamble, another preamble, I really liked the first paper this morning on infrastructure and the granular particulars of the reach of access. Hi, what are you doing?
You don't have a projection there.
Oh.
Is that what you would like to?
You can have them both, sure.
No,
Go ahead.
No, you set up, I don't know, that's the one you set up. This is no projection, it's a black screen.
Oh, well,
But maybe
the first screen is a black
so,
screen,
yeah.
so is that what it is now?
No, you have to, you have to just increase. Yeah, it's nothing.
Do we have nothing? That's good.
But if you move to the next one, do you want to check?
I don't want to do that yet.
Oh, okay, all right. So
Okay.
you have nothing on the screen.
Okay, thank you. So I really like the sort of idea of infrastructure and what she called the granular particulars of the reach of access and of connectivity. I hope that has resonance with what I'm going to present, even if, in a sense, what I'm chasing as reach or chasing as connectivity is considered more in terms of temporality here, perhaps even the extended reach of a live hand. In that case, like I say, it's more across time than space. And while I'm skeptical of the fetishization of liveness in this neoliberal moment, I find myself chasing the term even more than remain in this paper. And I take my cue in that from queer historiography and the feminist tracks of the affective turn that pay as much attention to necropolitics as to biopower, though that may not be overtly apparent here. But I want to mention it in case we want to come back to it in conversation. So, though I'm cautious about some neo-vitalism that uncritically romances liveness, the live as remain has been a through line in my work. So it pops up here again, and Artaud was mentioned earlier. Of course, Artaud was all about calling for life, capital L, as that which escapes the judgment of God. And no one was more primitivist or backward-looking toward the out mode than Artaud, unless it's me. So anyway, I want to signal my awarement, and that's what I wrote, but I think I meant awareness, of some of the problems that I foresee in this paper. I think in some ways the paper fails to bring anything coherent as an orientation to terms. I'd rather hope more for disorientation. Media, in a sense, disappear in this paper into the hands that hold them, yet I hope that I'm not going to overtly romance either the human or the bio-being as discrete, as any kind of discrete or bounded organism. Brilliantly resplendent on the face of a small disk made of bone is the unmistakable visage of a person, an actor, wearing a theatrical mask. Turned in profile, the mask and the masked actor we partially see behind it looks off to the side. Through the classical, the mask is up there, right? Okay, thanks. Through the classical downturn of the tragic mask's large and open mouth, A small bony tongue still flickers. In fact, this bit of flotsam of the Roman Empire, having picked up detritus from Greece, this little masked bone face, has ridden Western history all the way through its dark ages, its Renaissance, its Enlightenment and industrializations, across the sprawling anthro-obscene to our mutual now. The circle of bone itself, the small disc, gazes out at the viewer even as the little masked face on its face looks off to our left, as if calling or responding to some tragedy just out of view. What does it see? The vast and violent obscene, offstage, obscene of empire? But which temporal direction is to the side? The sideways look at tragedy or through tragedy is curious, but perhaps not exactly uncommon. Recall Clay's famous Angel, though Benjamin would have it that it's a storm of progress that blows in a straight line from past at the angel's front to future at the angel's back. Looking closely, one sees that the angel looks off to the side. In a performance by the choreographer Ralph Lemon that some of you may have seen on Tuesday night called Ceremonies of the Air, in which Walter, a man in his 90s from Mississippi, dons a spacesuit for a future journey or for a journey future, Benjamin's common fragment of text blew in from the side. I wasn't expecting it in the midst of this performance, I admit, but I'm always happy to hear it again. Long in orbit, Benjamin's improvisation, riff, take, redo, scat on Clay's Angel blew around again to pass by Walter and his spacesuit, and here it comes now. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned toward the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe and that keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. It sounds like liturgy because we've heard it so often. But a storm is blowing in from paradise. It has got caught in his wings. With such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned. And while the pile of debris before him grows skyward, this storm is what we call progress. So here's a clip from Lemon's dance, which really wasn't a dance alone, but also a film and a lecture. Medial specificity, breaks up and falls apart in a condition that has been called derogatorily theater. And I'm sorry about the quality of this. You can see that I just did it this morning. During this film, which is much longer, of course, Ralph is speaking and moving. We don't have him here, but we have this. Catching the angle of the angel's gaze, like Walter's trajectory to outer space, we might amend our Benjamin, as Svetlana Boym did, acknowledging the angel's sideways glance in the future of nostalgia. What is a scance of past? Or perhaps you can never see it by looking directly at it, as Lisa Parks, quoting Tui Hui Tui Hui Hu told us this morning. Like the small actor on the Roman coin who looks off to our left, angels and astronauts and the rest of us may be caught in something less linear, less front to back than Benjamin allowed. The storm Benjamin hails, perhaps, and its model of time might be more a wind on the swerve, or a time that, hurricane-like, circles round from the side, east, west, north, south, hitting you on the turn. In any case, when an actor looks to the side, she gestures toward the obscene, the offstage, the obscene, from where the tragic stubbornly recurs, and messengers enter to always report it. It seems too late, and yet also too early, for the same scene and the same tragedy will recur with granules of difference another night. Tragedy enters, that is, again and from the side, circling into a scriptive event composed precisely of replay. Is this a replay that seems impossible to alter, the horror that the bone face sees, the terror, in fact, of duration, without interval, without cut, without break? And is this different model for a different model for history than the back-to-front storm of so-called progress? This always entering both too late and too early from empires obscene. The hurricane wind pattern of the swerve or Klineman might take debris along with it rather than piling it, as in Benjamin's model, at the angel of history's feet. Rather, such a storm might carry us and our objects and our gestures and our languages and our mountains of prosthetics along in currents of habit of use, like the current that piles plastic in the enormous trash islands in the North Pacific Ocean gyre, swirling in an enormous clockwise vortex generated by four converging currents, north, south, east, west. Oh, I actually have props, which happen now. I need props. Currents or currencies that bring us around again. Some say the good thing about repetition, of course, is that maybe on the second or nth time around, you do it differently. I mean, that's the hope, anyway, of the most decrescent or becoming obsolescent or residual medium we have, theater. It's the live form that has long been dead. And also it's the form you just can't kill. And believe me, I have tried. It's a form that has been the obverse of new media and the definition of the out mode itself. Okay, I can't even make myself do it. But in the basement of the RISD Museum in Providence, I am in the basement of the RISD Museum of Art in Providence. It's 14 years into the second millennium since the birth of Christ, and as these things continue with the full force of habit to be counted. The bit of bone was carved when Christ had been dead for a century or so, Christ the first ready-made, which we learned earlier, on the cusp of and Rome, on the cusp of its Christianity, had not yet fully scorned the theater for its obvious paganisms, if you agree with St. Augustine. Curator Gina Borromeo hands this object to me in a small box, together with the plastic gloves I can use to touch it. I extend a hand. I'm initially sad that I can't meet the bone precisely pore to pore, but as I reach out and pick it up, I almost feel in advance its certain smoothness. It strikes me that one historical thing we can know about this object is clearly still true. The token would have sat perfectly in the palm of a hand in the 1st century BCE as it does today. Then, as now, it can easily pass hand to hand like a coin. Even through the palm face of plastic, I feel this aspect of its currency. It is made to pass. With the disc in my hand, it seems a strange question to ask whether the object might be live. But this is precisely the question I came to interrogate. The pursuit of this question in part concerns the historical boundaries problematically separating live art, such as theater or dance, from art formerly known as object-based or media art, with materiality and media or technology sometimes standing in unsupportable distinction to liveness or the bioactor. There have been many debates on this that need not be rehearsed here, and surely the old borders separating the supposed liveness of the supposedly human actor from the recordedness, traceness, prostheticness, pick your antonym for live, of technological media, of so-called apparatuses of capture versus so-called ephemerality or disappearance of so-called non-durational in-timeness of biobodies, these distinctions piling up here in trash islands certainly have not been fully operational for some time. One need only recall Wendy Chun's useful phrase, the enduring ephemeral, to access the unwinding of previously solid distinctions between disappearance on the one hand and remains on the other. But what to make of the proposition that the bone disk is live, that it is a scriptive thing in Robin Bernstein's sense, that exists as an event in its passage hand to hand, and that in hand it interinanimates, hand becoming tool, tool becoming hand, or consists in the overlay of hand with tool, both hand and tool being hand, both hand and tool being tool, would give the bit of bone an agency off of itself and into its intra-actions, its trajectories, and extend its being to the gyre in which it circulates. It circulates as debris with other debris, in this case, holding bone, precisely hands as debris. That is, give to the bone the flesh that passes it, and also give to the flesh the bone that it passes. Which comes first, or which lasts longer, bone token or flesh gesture? Looked at like this, the bit of debris takes place as its circulation, whether human to human, human to object, object to human, or object to object. This is perhaps what Karen Barad would call its intraactivity and intra-agency. In Agency and Embodiment, Carrie Noland not only gives us live embodied gestures, handwork, so to speak, as technologies of iterability, but offers a caveat through paleoethnographer André Leroy-Gorin to some habits of thinking about technological media in distinction to biousers. Noland reminds us that media theorists writing about writing and media relied on Leroy-Gorin's paleoethnography for their argument that one cannot envision human nature outside of its constitutive relation to technology or prosthetic tools. Using Leroy-Gorin, they posited that humans come to have the bodies they have, are embodied in a specific way through formative interaction with prosthetic tools. But, Noland argues, when emphasis is placed on the prosthetic of tools, some media theory tends to neglect Leroy-Gorin's, quote, equally forceful emphasis on the gesture manipulating those tools, end quote, the tools in hand, as it were, and thus privilege one side of the equation or relation in a straight line of linear development. They occlude, she argues, interactivity, the paleontologist's emphasis on, quote, lived somatic kinesthetic experience. This is the choreography of interinanimation. Not only is the gesturing, tool-using hand already for Leroy-Gorin itself a tool, and it's a tool that the ethnographer gives to animality in general, but the tool used by the hand is foremost a gesture. It gestures, and that the gesture makes the hand as much as the hand makes the gesture. And gesture, Avita Ronald tells us, always inaugurates relation, or we could say instantiates or responds to an interval, however infinitesimal or instant or broad, as in perhaps 40,000 years. The hand that touches is also the hand that is touched, to recall Husserl's famous image. Can we think of the cave wall as perhaps calling to the hand to use it, or the hand as cave's prosthetic extension, its tool perhaps, and that tool, the hand, calling to the cave to use it? Or get rid of the human entirely, the stone and the ochre in call and response? My response as a hand at the scene, or taking the scene in hand, occurs again at the incredible speed of connectivity, 40,000 years. Tools and bodies and like poses and bodies or gestures and objects co-constitute each other in and through mutual and recurrent encounters, practices that are always iterations, constituted and reconstituted in mimetic encounter. And and in this sense, live. And mimesis is not the same as representation. I'll just say that and get that out of the way. Liveness does not only exist on the side of the seemingly animate user of the seemingly inanimate tool, but flows all the way around, or as Nolan says, both ways. Neither comes first or second. To separate hand and tool, or animate and inanimate, begins to appear absurd when each constitutes, or as Fred Moten writes, improvises each other, or, in Mel Chen's phrase, co-inhabit each other with an intimacy she calls out as queer. Inter-inanimate. I picked this word out of the gyre of Fred Moten, but also take it from John Donne. It continues to resonate for me in this regard. In Donne's 1612 poem, The Ecstasy, the word inter-inanimate describes lovers locked in coital embrace. So still they appear as sepulchre statues, and indeed it's unclear in the poem whether they are actually just that, the liveness of maybe stone, or the stillness of maybe live, is moot at the point of ecstasy, or in the interval between their hands in which they hold each other's bodies. And anyway, ecstasy, like tragedy, always comes from the side, from the Greek ekstasis, to be or stand beside oneself. But let me be more flat-footed for a moment and try to chart a straighter course. The event of my encounter with the bone bit in the museum of the RISD Museum is simple in some respects. Of course, that event was a live event in that I was there and I was living, and I was experiencing an encounter with a disc contingent to the archive in the cellar of the museum in Providence in the 21st century. But the question is complex. If the coin, and let's call it a coin for now, is part of an ongoing scene, let's say not only my now in the bowels of the RISD Museum, but say of the long Roman Empire, then the bone face and I are both playing part in an ongoing deep time live scene. I have entered from the side, as it were, to a scene of extended circulation. Of course, it is not really such a stretch to claim this duration. The degree to which we live in the 21st century late capitalist developed world is the degree to which we are solidly what Derrida called global Latinized. Agamben makes this point as well. This is to say that the detritus of the Roman Empire includes the living. Many of our habits, gestures, words we use, our assumptions, our postures circulate. I have to go through a triumphal arch to get to my classroom every day, I'm just saying. Circulate in the ongoing gyre of empire, bits of empire's gestic jetsam. I mean, okay. Much as this bit of bone has been doing. This is one way of suggesting that we still live within the empiric purview of this small masked player. If we live in that empire, not only among its ruins, but as its ruins, living ruins, then who is to parse one liveness from another, one inanimacy from another? We cannot completely separate, in this sense, the being live in time of the ongoing scene of the bone from the being alive of Gina and myself there in the small room with it. Gina and I and the bone, the plastic gloves, the light, the table, that's Gina. The room itself are all a part of this liveness or livingness, this enduring ephemeral, this coming around again in a basement scene, obscene offstage of the museum proper. And as momentary as it was, our meeting with the bone lasted an hour, and as banal, Gina, as an archivist, does this kind of work every day, it was also a scene of significant duration, in which this bit of bone has been passed hand to hand to hand, and in which hands have reached out to receive it. What residue of hand, residue of use, drags along with this object, and what residue of use remains in the hand? If now it is a relic lodged in the little box before us, what does the little tongue tell? And here is where we gather evidence and make stories, as Rick was discussing yesterday. What are the stories that attach to the tail of this bit of bone on its long trajectory? Scholars have variously called similar bone discs coins, games token, or theater tickets. Today, as mentioned, the disc has value as a museum artifact. It is not exchanged anymore as a coin or a ticket exchanged for goods or services, or it is no longer a surrogate for the player of a board game. It is passed as art. In this scene, the bone stands as evidence of other scenes, nested in sets of historical contingencies that are long past. If it had been a coin, the exchange rate has changed. If a theater ticket, the show has closed. If a game token, the rules have changed. And yet, these stories attach like bits upon bits with the assumption that the disc began its journey at the hands of a human and will end in a safekeeping in a house of preservation, that is the RISD Museum, in the hands of an archivist. But the small face of the actor looks through the small face of a mask at something else, stage right. Where bone as discrete object begins and ends is undone by this gesture. It's made explicit. There's a space off. Beginnings and endings. Think of the appearance of this bone in utero, nested within an animal fetus, within an animal mother, following a scripted molecular drama of other bones in other animal bodies in other times. This bone script, then, becoming bone in utero, is part of a bigger bone being of animal species, repeating itself across generations. Think, too, of the bones of the human hand encountering the animal bone. Imagine the first hands to carve this little bone, to feel its little tongue and enable its possible words. Bone separated from bone by the flesh of fingers. The bones of those particular human hands have likely long turned to dust and circulate on air, or better, jumped into other hands through body-to-body training, body-to-body transmission of skills. That is, even if the particular animal body and the first human hands that came together to fashion this disc have passed away, the work of those hands, that is, the handicraft of carving, may have been passed on as techne, embodied physical training, and thus remain. Those hands, hands that carve, hands that hold, hands that pass, those hands, if hands are not discrete, those hands that made the bone may yet remain. And which, one might ask, is older or more resilient, less ephemeral, more at risk, this small disc or my flesh hand? Or is the question of origins absurd when attention to the bone instructs when attention, as the bone instructs, might better turn to the side, to the passerby, passing bone to bone to bone, hand to hand to hand, trajectories of liveness that exist in and as our intervals, cross matter of encounter. Gina and I pass the small disc back and forth between us as we discuss it together. Was it a ticket? Was it a coin? We don't really know what it actually was, she says, but she says it was not a coin. She is adamant about this, though I beg to differ because I've read someone who claimed coinage. It may have been a theater ticket, as theater historian and classical scholar Margaret Bieber would name such objects. Others, like Alfoldi Rosenbaum, would see such tesserae as game counters, and that were either used on mobile game boards or on mosaic games sedimented in place. But it being a game counter, I'd say to her, would not necessarily cancel its use as coinage, for, as Archer St. Clair argues, gaming pieces were, quote, undoubtedly used in commerce and as gambling tokens as well, end quote. And theater? Alfoldi Rosenbaum, adamant that the tokens are not coins, also adamantly argues against Bieber, claiming that the tokens have, quote, no relationship to theater. No relationship to theater? The tiny actor's mask suggests otherwise. Something of ancient new media of Greek theater persists in the object, even if the object was not used in the theaters themselves or exchanged exactly like tickets or coins. For, of course, something of gaming and of circulation and exchange belongs as much to theater as it does to coinage. As Jennifer Wise argues in Dionysus Writes, quote, the rise in the use of coinage just prior to the appearance of drama helped determine that the theatrical stage was and remains a mercantile space, a space for exchange. In fact, upstairs in the RISD collection, a coin from Naxos winks at me from behind a glass case. Dionysus, the god of theater, is on one side, Silenius, his chief satyr, on the other. In this case, coinage and theater are literally flip sides of the same. But Gina and I were not at the City Dionysia, we were in the basement of the museum, and the player we were considering, his tongue still flickering, was not live in the conventional sense. We couldn't quite see what the boned face sees, couldn't quite hear what it hears. Held in the palm of a hand, the little masked face might see a wide arc of fingers, or turned toward the palm, the little mask might see the rutted crease of a fleshy lifeline. If, that is, objects participate as sensate subjects in events. And why not? As Slavoj Zizek intones, wearing a mask of Jacques Lacan, quote, I can never see the object at the point from which it is gazing at me, end quote. And in this case, the object looks at me through a mask that looks away. But vision isn't everything between object and object, or human and object, or human and human. Think of these performances / photographs by Valley Export. Stone flesh, intimacies that suggest a vulnerable living with, a mutual becoming. In these pieces, 1976, Export's Corpora Configurationen, for instance, the human form is molded by the architecture which is molded by the human form, like the disc in hand or the hand on bone. In these images, as I read them, inanimation and intra-vulnerability seem to arise as much from the stone as from flesh, which makes which made which is less clear than it might be. Stone is as articulate as body, and body as articulate as stone. The agents of that speaking are mutual and interinanimate. The two not only appear interinanimate, but are interinanimate, traveling across our space here together now. And note, of course, it is not as stone and flesh that these gestures make their transit here, but as photograph. Stone, flesh, enters your eyes and, like mercury in your blood, makes physical contact with you. As Roger Calwa says of cross-species mimicry, and as Mick Tausig and Deborah Kapshan and other anthropologists suggest of possession trance, quote, things that have once been in contact remain united, end quote. And Deleuze, though he wasn't writing of possession trance, mercury poisoning, or body snatching, but of ideas, wrote, quote, another always thinks in me, end quote. Gina puts the little face back. Oh, here's a mural of ukuleles that I also wanted to show you, okay. Gina puts the little face back in its box. It's hard to see the cover go back on top, though I wonder if the bit of bone isn't somewhat relieved. As I get ready to leave, Gina hands me a photograph, and there is the bone in replica on a glossy 8x10. I hold the glossy photo in my hands for a moment before sliding it inside the pages of a book for safekeeping. I can send you a digital image as well if you'd like, she says. Yes, please do, I say. Walking back to my car, I think it all over. The travels of this little object have lifted off its manifestation in a mode made for passing hand to hand, and catapulted the face into photographic paper and then the realm of pixels and light. A common passage, one medium into another, hand to hand to hand, medium to medium to medium. The game token, 2 millennia later, continues to circulate, but do we still experience it live? Are circulation and exchange still affected hand to hand if the touch of our hands are now through keyboards, another kind of plastic, and the exchange of gaze between the disk's eyes and ours is one mediated by a photographic image? Does it matter that the bit of bone is now the matter of light? Recall, the bone is shaped into a disc. On the bone is a face covering bone. On the face is a mask covering face. And now pixelated light performs the cover, a cover, musically speaking, on the bone face mask. Here, and I'm almost done, as on the token coin ticket, one medium becomes itself by crossing media, one standing in for another, masking another, circulating. The weight of the little disc, like its smoothness, are not necessarily lost to the screen. And when Gina sends the email attachment and I open it with a touch of my finger, the image that opens onto the screen hails me without question, just as it hailed me in the basement. Hey, you there, face me. I am still not facing you. Through a gesture across intervals, relation is inaugurated. The flicker of the little tongue reminds me that the mask is a mask, after all. As a mask, it has, like a mask, always dissimulated, always been not just an image of surrogation, but an act of surrogation, even on bone, even through plastic, even on screen, always already moving ob scene. This is to say that its agency has been the theatrical real as well as the material real. That evening, before falling asleep, I remember the bone tucked away in the basement, and the scene of the photograph of the bone as a digital image on my screen also floats to mind. I have to admit a lingering unease about what exactly is offstage right of the mask, and how to tell it, and how not to tell it the same way. Thank you.